Hello, welcome to Exotic Gardening UK, Yorkshire Kris Weekly, and in this week's episode we're going to plant a palm tree. We're going to cover positioning, different types of palm, so feather palm and fan palms, the depth that you plant palm trees, feeding palm trees, what size of palm tree is best to plant, and the time of year to plant palm trees. So today we're going to plant a palm tree, and there's lots of different types of palm tree we can grow here in the UK and Northern Europe, but for the benefit of this video we're going to be really looking at hardy palm trees, ones that we don't have to protect over winter. And we've got two main types we can grow in the UK. We've got a fan palm like this, which is a Trachycarpus palm with fan shaped leaves, palmate leaves, and we've also got what we call feather palms. So here we've got a bootia, quite a heavy one. You can see long feather-like leaves, like a bird's feather. There are other types of palm, but these are the main two types of form of palm trees that we can grow, because most of these are hardy. So we've got different Trachycarpus and we've got feather palms. So we've got bootias, we've got jubaeas, and we've got Phoenix canariensis as well. And these two different forms of palm tree need slightly different spacing requirements, because bootias and other feather palms go really wide as well as tall, whereas fan palms on the whole have a trunk that's relatively slender and the leaves are more at the top rather than at the base. So we need to think about this when we're choosing our planting location. So spacing is really important. Do we want the palm tree to be a specimen in its own right and have nothing around it so you can see the palm tree, or do we want it sort of closer together, planted with other plants to create sort of like a jungle canopy, or do we even want it as a bit of a barrier? So depending on how you want your palm tree to look in the garden will determine how you plant it. So in the case of this here, this nice feather palm, this is actually a cross between a jubaea and a bootia, so a hybrid palm. This will grow really large outwards as well as upwards. So before I plant this, I'm just going to show you some other feather palms in the garden to show you how it can look if you plant it on its own or far from other plants. So this is a bootia erispacer, and as you can see it's crowded in with other plants either side of it. So you can see the plant, but you can't see the full form of it because we've got other plants growing nearby. And this is a big jubaea feather palm, and as you can see it's got no planting close by, so you can really appreciate the palm tree in its own right without other plants getting in the way. Now another thing to consider when you're positioning a palm tree is how close to a path you plant your palm tree. As you can see here, these palm trees are close to the path, and it means at this stage I'm having to move the leaves out of my face just to get round them. And these have been planted about 30 centimetres away from the edge of the path. And as they've grown up, the leaves have got bigger and the plant's got bigger overall. And now it's sort of head height and it's just in my way, and you sort of have to dodge past it on the path, so it's not ideal. Ideally, you'd plant much further away from the path so that the leaves are not in your way. Now with fan palms like this, Trachycarpus, eventually it will grow a nice tall trunk, the lower leaves can be cut away and you'll be able to come down this path with no issue at all. Now this here is a beautiful bootia odorata, and as we mentioned earlier, feather palms grow outwards as well as upwards, and they have their leaves sort of draping down to the ground for many years before they start forming a big trunk. So this, as you can see, it's totally in my way at this angle like this, and what I've had to do further down, I've cut off lots and lots of leaves, which is not ideal because it means it's spoiling the form of the plant and we're not getting that beautiful canopy. So this plant again is being planted about 30-40 centimetres away from the edge of the path, which means it's grown huge. And you've got to bear that in mind when you're planting your palm tree. Don't plant them close to paths where you're going to be walking past them often, because you're going to have to be sort of battering past them like this, and it's going to get quite annoying, or you're going to have to cut back the leaves like I've done here, which means that the plant can't grow to its full potential and can look a bit unsightly. So ideally, when you're planting a palm tree, especially if it's a feather palm, plant it, I would say, at least 1 metre away from the edge of a path, but ideally more than 2 metres away, because they grow very, very large indeed. So also, when it comes to positioning, you've got to think of aspect and how much sun you've got to work with for your palm tree. Ideally, most palm trees want full sun, as maximum sun as you can. That's not always possible, so part sun will suffice for most palm trees. But just obviously, the more sun they have, the better they grow, the quicker they grow, and the happier they'll be overall. So in this case here, we're going to plant this nice Bootia Jabea cross. As you can see from the image, we're in full sun at the moment, and it's south facing that way, so we get sun early over my shoulder in the morning. The sun pans around the sky, ends up over there, and it'll still get sun in the evening. And as the palm tree grows, it'll get bigger and bigger, and it'll get more and more sun as well. And in terms of position, we talked about trying to keep it away from paths. Well, the path here to where the plant is, that's over 2 metres in this direction to the path, and in front of it we're looking about 1.5 metres, so it's far enough back that it's not going to have its leaves all over the paths. So we're going to plant this palm, and before I do that, we're going to just quickly talk about the size of palm trees when we plant them. So ideally you want to plant it at a relatively small size. The bigger you plant a palm tree, the less easy it is to establish, especially as a lot of specimen palm trees that are large have been grown in a field, dug up, transplanted to a pot, grown on maybe 6 months, maybe a year, and they will have rooted into a pot, but not as well as if they've been in a small plant in a small pot without having to get its roots torn out of the ground and put into a pot. So a smaller plant size is best. The one I'm going to plant here, if I lift up this pot compared to me, you can see how big that pot is. It's pretty hefty, nice, lots of roots in there, and you can see it's not really got a trunk as such on this palm tree. It's starting to form what I'd call a proto trunk at the base here, but it's not a full big trunk. And this is an ideal size to plant a palm tree, because what it means is it's not too big, and it will get its roots in nice and easy into the ground in its first season. And if you're growing a feather palm, if you're growing a fan palm like this one here, again, it's got the starting of a trunk, but this isn't a proper trunk. And again, this is an ideal size to plant, so anything between 10, 20, 30 litre pot, something like that. Anything much bigger with a much bigger trunk is physically harder to plant and won't have the same vigour as a palm of this size when you plant it. So it's actually time to plant this palm tree, and ground is really important obviously as well. So this ground here is being cleared, so there's nothing around it, and I've improved the soil. The last thing you want to do is plant a palm tree in really heavy compacted soil that waterlogged in winter, and it's really hard for the palm to get its roots into that soil. So what I've done with this part of the garden is I've incorporated loads of new topsoil and lots of organic material over the last winter, which has started to break down. So lots of manure and compost in here. And if I just start digging a hole, it breaks up nicely. I'm on a clay soil, so it is pretty heavy, but because I've incorporated all that organic matter over the last few years, you can see it breaks up nicely, and it's got some good depth to it here as well. So it's not a shallow soil, this is nice and deep. It's about 18 inches, so 45 centimetres deep of good thick topsoil like this before it goes into the subsoil below, which is in my case a sort of a very thick clay and shale. So you don't want to just get a small hole, you actually want to dig a bigger hole than the size of the pot. So we'll dig this hole now. Like I said, this is good soil. I've weeded this part of the garden as well, so there's no weeds in this area. And obviously plants come in round pots. We're going to plant it in pretty much a squarish hole here. And in terms of depth of the palm, we want to actually plant it so that it's at the same depth as it's growing in the pot. Sometimes if you've had a palm tree in a pot for too long, the roots push down and push up the palm tree, and you might notice roots above soil level. If that's the case, what you need to do is plant to the base of the palm tree. So you want to cover any exposed roots. So this hole is pretty much dug. We can see if it's deep enough in a second. I just popping the palm tree in. Just tickle over the soil at the base there as well. So we'll just pop this in, see if we're roughly the right depth. And that's roughly right. So we know we can get this palm tree out and have a look at its roots. So this is a beautiful specimen, quite a rare find because it's a cross between two types of feather palm, Bootea odorata and a Jubea, both very hardy palm trees. So we've got the planting hole to the right depth. Now we just need to get it out of the plant pot. So I need my label for later, so we'll put that just over there for now. And now we'll get the plant out. So I like to turn it upside down, give it a shake, and bring it out like that. Now look at the roots here. Absolutely gorgeous, nice, fleshy, creamy roots that have grown all the way around. All the way around. It's full of life, full of vigour, this palm tree. Got big, thick, fleshy roots at the base, and got lots of feeding roots all around the side as well. And they're all attached well at the base of the palm tree. Sometimes you get a palm and it's only got one or two big thick roots on one side of the base of the palm, and the other side there's no roots at all, and it can be really wobbly. If that's the case, then plant it a little bit deeper and support it with like a brick on one side where the roots haven't developed to stop it rocking too much. But this one here has got great root attachment all the way around, and we're basically just going to plant it in the hole. Now in terms of feeding, some people do like to use mycorrhizal fungus at this point and sort of spread that over the roots and spread it in the planting hole. That isn't actually a form of feeding, but what the idea behind that is will allow a relationship between the fungi and the roots to improve the uptake of nutrients into the palm tree through the roots. I don't know if there's any proper evidence it works in palm trees, but it wouldn't do any harm. So if you've got some mycorrhizal fungi, then you could add that at this point. I haven't got any, and I've planted several dozen palm trees without any mycorrhizal fungi, and on the whole they're growing really, really well, so I don't think they really need it. The most important thing is you get the right place for your palm tree, you've got a good nice soil to plant it in, and make sure that you keep this well watered. So it's as easy as picking it up, putting it in, and then we've got to get this level. We don't want it angled to one side, we want it nice and level. So we'll just play about until we're happy that we've got it level. And I think, let's have a look, sometimes you've got to stand back and you've got to think if it's level. So I'm just going to walk around it now from different angles, and for this angle it looks fine. Let's just walk around here, walk around. Yeah, I think it just needs to have a little bit at the front edge. So I think we just need to put a little bit of soil underneath on this front side. Yeah, I think that looks good. So we're just going to backfill. So what you want to avoid doing is adding a different sort of soil or compost to the planted hole that's different from the proper soil. So basically what I mean is the soil you dug out for the hole is the soil you want to put it back around your palm tree. Don't get rid of this soil and put a different compost around there, because you want the roots to grow out into the original soil. If you put a nice rich compost around there, they'll sort of congregate all the roots in that area and not send out roots as quickly into the surrounding soil. So we're just going to backfill like so, and then press down, make sure there's no air pockets. Like so. And you can, if you want, have a little bit of a mound if you've not got really good drainage, just to allow a little bit of drainage from the base. But level planting is good if you can do it. So that's pretty much it. Just double check that it's level. If not, I might have to reposition it. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. The sun's on it, the sun's shining, it looks good in that position. And although at this point in time it looks pretty small, it's got all this space around it, it won't take many years to go from a plant this size into one that will cover this entire area. So you've got to think long term when you're planting a palm tree. It's not an annual, it's not an herbaceous perennial, it is a type of tree, and they grow large on the whole. So this one here hopefully will establish well, and in 5-10 years it'll be a beautiful specimen covering this part of the garden. There's one more thing we need to do, and that is we need to water this in really well. So I'll get a full watering can and I'll water all the way around here. Just going to firm it in as well. That's basically planting a palm tree. Now in terms of feeding, we don't want to feed it straight away. We want the palm tree to get its roots into the soil and move out into the soil. So I'm not going to feed this palm tree at all this year. There's plenty of nutrients in my soil anyway, because it's a good friable but clay heavy soil, so it's got lots of nutrients packed in there. If you had a really sandy soil or a very nutrient poor soil, then I would have added lots of manure anyway to it before planting. You might have to start feeding this a bit earlier, but ideally don't feed it the first sort of year, just to get its roots further out into the soil, and then you can feed it every spring and summer. So I like to use bloodfish and bone around the base, a bit of a natural fertilizer, and I might use a bit of seaweed spray as well, just to green up the leaves from time to time and just give it an extra pick me up. But apart from that, palm trees don't need much fertilizing. They will get all the nutrients they need from your soil, so don't overfeed palms. Definitely don't add any high nitrogen rich fertilizer to palm trees after August, because that will encourage lots of lush growth which can easily get cut back and burnt by frost in autumn and winter. So in terms of what time of year is best to plant a palm tree, well, ideally if it's a hardy palm tree, any time when the ground isn't frozen. But ideally I think spring is probably the best time. So April and May, when the ground is warming up, there's moisture in the ground and you've got a full growing season ahead. Alternatively, in autumn, so in September, October, when the ground's still nice and warm so the roots can establish before the winter comes. So if you've enjoyed this video about planting a palm tree in the ground, I've got lots of other videos, including planting a palm tree in a pot, which I'll do a link in the corner. Thank you for watching this edition of Exotic Gardening UK. Join me next week, where I'll be doing more in the garden.